Hi, my name is Summer and my study is over the split brain in man. Now, this is a study done by a man whose name I can't pronounce, so for the rest of the video, we're just going to call him G. A little background and reasoning on why this study is important and why it's being done is medical operations, such as the ones for extreme epilepsy, can lead to the brain being split into two different hemispheres. Now, we already have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere, but this completely splits them by cutting the corpus callosum. Now, it is said that these two hemispheres, after being split, can act as two brains. And what researchers kind of want to find out is how these two brains affect mental functionings, or if there are actually two brains under one skull. So here's a little more background on the reasoning and importance of this study. So here you go. So that's enough of the video. That's enough background that you really need for this. Kind of G's hypothesis was he had a smaller question. What is the function of the corpus callosum? How big of a part does it play in this brain splitting other than separating the two halves? And then also his more pressing question was, how is splitting the brain affect mental capacities? So what does it do to your functionings, your overall brain capabilities? If you can see in this picture, here's the corpus callosum. It's this little X right here. It says we need to work together, trying to pull both of the brain pieces back together. And then it says it's the great mediator. Now, this study was kind of first seen in a cat experiment, and this cat had a split callosum and a split optic chiasm. Now, what they found was with this cat, he could be presented a stimulus or a task in one eye, and he could either do it normally or he could learn how to do it. But when this task was presented to the other eye, he had to relearn how to do it because his brains were split and so was his vision. So the methods that G used, we already know the left hemisphere goes to the right side of the body and the right hemisphere goes to the left side of the body. Well, this started off with 10 patients with split brains. He didn't split the brains to find answers. They were already split when he was studying them based on various medical reasons. He did multiple observations, multiple tests. He did, in fact, 2 different visual tests. His first test was he flashed lights across both the right side and the left side of the visual fields, and he wanted the participants to say what they saw. So most of the participants responded with, I saw it on the right side, making their left hemisphere the one that saw it. And very little, if any, reported that they saw the stimulus or the flashing lights on the left side. This led to even more tests, visual and tactical. The visual test is the one presented in the top right, where the participant or the patient is shown a word, a written symbol, a picture, and here's a screen right here blocking his view. And he's told to pick the object that's on the screen with the same side of the body that it's being presented to. So keep in mind the same side of the body is the opposite hemisphere. Now the tactical tests were the ones on the bottom right, where they are holding an object in their hand and they're presented with pictures or associations or a group of objects, and they're told to pick out the one that they're feeling. And what they found from these tests is the right side of the body is good with sensations, which is the left hemisphere, and they were able to easily verbalize their tasks. And the left side of the body kind of struggled with stimuli to a point where I could hit something with like the left side of my body and I would vaguely know it's there, maybe not know it's there at all, which was related to the right hemisphere. So the test showed that the right hemisphere was unable to verbalize the results. But if they were told to point at something, they were able to do that. They just could not verbalize. And the left hemisphere was really good at verbalizing. In fact, they can do it almost perfectly. And for the tactical tests, the right hemisphere, once again, couldn't really verbalize the results. And the left hemisphere had the most control as far as language is concerned. So overall, he noticed that the separation of the hemispheres didn't reduce mental capacities because he saw different strengths and weaknesses in both hemispheres of the brain. He decided that some had their strengths, some had their weaknesses, and they would kind of even out. Now, both hemispheres, he did realize, are separated by both perception and knowledge. And the left hemisphere is the one that is dominant in language, as the left hemisphere was the hemisphere that could verbalize all the tests and the answers to the test and so on. But he concluded from all of this that the two hemispheres, when they're split, actually act as two brains inside of our one skull. So his importance, he led to findings that we weren't completely sure about. We had done animal studies and all of that, and we had a small idea, but we weren't sure if it'd work in humans and etc. But he also realized how the different sides act and that they both have their own strengths, their own weaknesses. And this led to other researchers performing their own studies and building upon the info, such as Diamond. So Diamond did a very kind of similar study to G, but his study was more focused on attention. So he did auditory and tactual tests. His auditory test, he had people place their hands under a screen, just like G did. And so where the screen blocked the visual capabilities to see what your hand was grabbing or what it was touching. And he had them press a button when they hear a signal. Now, he tried to send signals through both different hemispheres, but without interrupting the other hemisphere. And his tactual, once again, he had them place their hands under a very similar screen, but this time they had their finger on a coil, and this coil was vibrating and moving, and he kind of wanted them to point out which hand they felt it under what stimuli, so on and so forth. And he concluded with the right hemisphere being dominant in attention. Now, G discovered that the left hemisphere was dominant in language. So with very similar results, Diamond said that each hemisphere has its own strengths and its own weaknesses, just like G did. But he also answered one of G's questions where the corpus callosum plays a fairly big part as far as attention is concerned. Another researcher that kind of built upon G's ideas was Dasso. Now, he studied split brains and what would happen if your hand crossed your midline. So like my right hand is controlled by my left hemisphere, but if it crosses the midline, is it controlled by my right hemisphere since it's on the other side, or is it still controlled by my left? So he did this study down in this corner, and he basically tested what would happen if the right hand was on the right side, the left hand on the left side, but what if one hand or both hands were crossed? What he concluded was that both hemispheres stay in control of their hands. But he also noticed, based on this task, that visual motor space is present in both hemispheres, which kind of led him to conclude that if they both have certain aspects, there are two brains instead of one brain, just like G said. Now, another researcher did very similar experiments to both Diamond and G, so I didn't really list them here, but what he found out was, once again, very similar to what the other researchers found out, that the left hemisphere is dominant with speech and verbal functioning and consciousness, just like G, and that the right hemisphere was more dominant in attention, maybe a little bit of perception. You know, if you can see in this picture, the right hemisphere does the art awareness, the musical, imagination, insight. So what I found out was all three of these researchers agreed with G, and they all found very similar results, and they built upon his ideas with new research, new findings, new ideas that researchers in the future can build upon. And this contributes to both psychological and neuroscience fields. Psychological with cognitive behavior, brain and behavior, so on and so forth. Brain studies and neuroscience, kind of their job is to study the brain. So this leads to how they can kind of understand the functioning and all of that. Well, thank you for watching my video, and I hope you have a good day. Bye.